Hey, it's April 9th, and we find ourselves in 1 Samuel chapters 4 through 8. Now, since we have 5 chapters to cover today, let's dive right in. Chapters 4 through 7 describe a series of confrontations between Israel and the Philistines. It's almost comical at times, the way God deals with the Philistines and specifically their main deity, Dagon. It's almost hopeful at times, because it seems that Israel's finally turning back to God. But ultimately it's sad, because Israel's revival is short-lived, only one of convenience. And what Israel really wanted was to be just like all the other nations around them. In chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, we see Israel attack the Philistines, but they get defeated. And so in verse 3, the elders said, "Let's bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." You see, Israel's treating God just like an idol, bringing him out when they needed him, and then putting him away when they didn't. God doesn't work that way. God does not bend to our will. He's not some magic genie who fixes our plans when they go wrong. He wants us to follow his will with all our heart, all the time. But, verse 4, the people brought the Ark of the Covenant, and Hophni and Phinehas were there with the Ark. And in verse 5, as soon as the Ark comes into the Israelite camp, they're encouraged, and they thought, now we're going to win the battle, because now God was with them. And no, they just had a gold box. God was not with them. Verses 6 through 11, the Philistines learned that the Ark is in the Israelite camp, and they get afraid because they remembered how God struck Egypt with plagues. But they didn't want to be slaves to the Hebrews, so they muster their courage, they fight anyway, and they end up defeating Israel. And in verse 11, they capture the Ark itself. Hophni and Phinehas are also killed that very same day, as prophesied back in chapter 2. In verses 12 through 18, when Eli learns that Hophni and Phinehas were dead, which wasn't a surprise, but more importantly to him, when the Ark of the Covenant had been captured, it says he fell over backwards, broke his neck, and died. And then it specifically says, for the man was old and heavy. So that's how he broke his neck. And then verses 19 through 22 tell us that Phinehas' wife also dies in childbirth. However, the child does live. Now, chapter 5 takes us to Philistia, where God punishes the Philistines for taking the Ark. In verses 1 through 5, the Philistines take the Ark and put it in the temple of Dagon, actually set it right beside Dagon's statue. And the next morning, they go into the temple and they find that Dagon's statue is actually bowing face down on the ground before the Ark of the Covenant. They're thinking that's kind of strange, and they just put it back up and don't think anything of it. But the next morning they go back in, they find Dagon not only bowing down before the Ark, face down, but now his head and his hands are broken off. God was showing the Philistines that he was more powerful than their idol, Dagon. Now in verses 6 through 12, as a result of them taking the Ark, God inflicts the Philistines with what are called tumors. And that's referring to either sores or boils, the mark of the plague that would be spread by rats that God used to kill the Philistines wherever they took the Ark of the Covenant in Philistia. And so the Philistines had had enough. In chapter 6, they just send the Ark back to Israel along with a guilt offering of gold and call it good. Now we get back to Israel. Now that Eli is dead, Samuel becomes the next and final judge of Israel. In verses 3 and 4, Samuel told Israel if they would put away their idols and serve the Lord with their whole heart, then God would deliver them from the Philistines. And so, cool, the people did in verse 4. And verses 5 through 15 describe Israel defeating the Philistines. And it says the Philistines did not enter Israel's territory again. And in verse 14, the cities that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel. But this revival is only one of convenience and is short-lived, because in chapter 8, Israel wants a human king to follow, not God, so they can be like everyone else. Verses 1 through 3 reveal that Samuel sadly followed in Eli's footsteps when it came to being a father. Like Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas before them, Samuel's sons took bribes and perverted justice. And in verse 4, Israel tells Samuel that they did not want his sons to lead them after he died, which is a good thing. But instead, they wanted a king to lead them, like all the nations. That's bad. In verses 6 through 9, God comforts Samuel and tells him, Israel isn't rejecting you, they're rejecting God. But God tells Samuel, warn Israel about what a king will do to them. And they're going to make this choice informed. Verses 10 through 18, Samuel warns them that a king would take their sons and appoint them to his army, to be his farmers, to be his weaponsmiths. Verse 13, he would take your daughters to be his perfumers, his cooks, and his bakers. Verse 14, he will take the best of the land from them and give it to his servants. He will tax you and give the money to his officials and his servants. And he will make your servants and animals his. And he warned them in verse 18 that in that day you will cry out because of the king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you that day. Remember, often the worst punishment God can give us is exactly what we ask for. And so God gives them what they want. Verses 19 through 20. The people refused to listen. They wanted a king. They didn't want to be holy. They didn't want to be literally different, set apart for the Lord, the example for the other nations to follow. They wanted to be like everyone else. So God tells Samuel, give them what they want. And Israel is going to learn the hard way that God's ways are better than ours. So what can we take home from this passage today? Number one, don't treat God like an idol. A pastor friend I once knew referred to this as having Jesus in your pocket. You bring him out when you need him, and then you put him away when you don't. The truth is, we always need Jesus. We always need to follow our God with our whole heart all the time. We need to follow his will, not try and bend it to ours, which never works, by the way. Number two, don't be like everyone else. Jesus said in Matthew 5:48 that we were created and saved to be perfect. Literally, the word is holy, meaning set apart, different from the unbelieving world. And then why? It says because our God is perfect, holy, set apart from the unbelieving world. When it comes to living our lives, what we say, what we think, what we do, we are to follow Jesus' example, not the world's. My prayer for us today is that we follow God with our whole heart, recognizing that we always need him every second of every day, and that we have the courage to be holy, to be set apart, different from the unbelieving world. God still has us here to be examples to others of the true life that he died and saved us to live. And if we are no different than unbelievers, if we are just like everyone else, what reason does an unbelieving world have to believe? If you haven't done so already, please download our Through the Bible reading plan at asburycommunitychurch.org/throughthebible. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon.